Hello, and welcome to another interview on Human. Today we will be interviewing Bing Howell, a man who has worked in the education system, in the field of education, for the last 10 years, serving underserved communities. He has also been featured on TEDx in 2019 in a feature called Lessons Left Out. Today, we will be finding out some of the lessons left out in the education system of modern day, and also to hear his opinion in about the modern day education system and what we can do to improve it. Without further ado, let us bring him on. Hey, we are in the house. Great.
All right, we sorted out the
Wow.
technical difficulties.
Difficulties, couple of technical difficulties, but we're here. This is great. Um, I'm happy to have you with us. How are you feeling today, first and foremost?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome, man. I spent a lot of time actually reading your bio and watching your video, so I do have an assortment of questions today for you. Amazing. Introduce yourself to the audience. I don't want to spoil the interview.
All right, I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, indeed. Oh, no, no. Please introduce yourself. Give us a little backstory as to
Okay, all
who
right.
you
So,
are.
how long of an intro are we looking for? Is this like 101, 201, or 301?
You can keep it short because
Okay,
I still do want people to explore who you are through the questions too. Yes,
okay,
indeed.
okay, great. So things that I like folks knowing about me is that I'm a first generation American. My father was from Trinidad. My mother was from Panama. Um,
Wow.
and some of how my story makes sense to me is that my dad's dad, so my grandfather was a butcher with 11 kids in Trinidad. My dad actually made it off the island because of education, and he had a PhD by the time he was in his early 30s. Or, sorry,
Mm,
before he was 30. And so, with both parents actually having access to education and the American dream being what it were, they also made sure that the six kids that they raised actually all knew that education was a pathway for them. Um, but because my father was a had his doctorate in political science and history, he also made sure that we were very aware of how many obstacles were also in our place for taking advantage of that pathway. And so
mm,
at the same time where we knew we needed a high quality education, we knew that it wasn't designed for us. And we always knew that we had our parents backing on sort of like making it through the system, and eventually being
mm.
able to take advantage of all the benefits that the system actually does have to offer. Right. So that's kind of foundational
Wow.
for the what and the why of like where I'm at and actually why education actually matters to me. So fast forward to a number of years later. The reality is I started off working in the investment banking space at Merril
Mm,
Lynch many years ago. I realized after, less than a few years doing that work that I wasn't really passionate about it. At the same time, I put together a financial literacy program for middle school students across New York. And by the time we hit the
mm,
kickoff, I realized that I cared more, and doing that work engaged me more than the full time job I had, and I had to figure out some way of doing that more full time. And the
mm.
reality is soon after I went to get my MBA, and I've been doing some work in education ever since. As of the past decade plus, I've gotten really good at being a systems fixer. I would like to say that I do it um, largely because I love putting puzzles together. I'm very good at doing it, but also because I listen very well. I.e., what I
Mm.
do well is being able to say, this is your backyard. You have huge aspirations and visions for what you think can be accomplished for your kids and your communities. Help me understand, like, how can I partner with you to unlock that? And with people understanding their backyard and having that passion, and with me having passion for being able to help piece together solutions, I've gotten really good at working together to say, like, okay, so here's how we could translate this into something that is tangible, operational, doable, and let's build it together. So that's the short version of it that
Amazing.
ties into like the why. Does that answer the question?
It answers the question full on. It does answer the question. Grand intro. Amazing. Amazing. It's just like your bio. Just like your bio, my
All
man.
right.
So I wanted to start off by asking what part of, I read that you were from California, and I wanted to first start off with what part of California are you born in and where you were raised?
The best part of California, Sacramento.
Oh, okay. I
I
was
mean,
like,
that's a given, right?
the best part of California, Sacramento. How was it growing up in Sacramento? I only been to San Francisco, California, and Oakland.
So full transparency. So born in Sacramento, I moved around a lot, like a
Mm-hmm.
lot.
Oh yeah.
So my family left Sacramento when I was 8, and we moved to
Mm-hmm.
Mexico. So Guadalajara, Jalisco, and Mexico for a few years. And so I have high level memories of what life was like before 8.
No, no,
Uh-oh.
no, 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 no. You're okay. I'm outside.
So I have,
Continue.
I was like, is that me? Um, no.
Outside.
So I have high level memories of life
Right.
before 8, but the reality is most of it doesn't have much to do with California, right? It has to
Okay.
do with going to school. It has to do with my family. And it has to do with the ecosystem that my parents built that actually you could have placed it anywhere. As I've gotten older, once again, getting to Mexico being 8 and 9 years old, the older I get, the more formative my life gets, having to do with the surroundings around it. Um,
Mm.
but more than anything else, I guess I'll just universally share, and this is pretty standard throughout every chapter of my life. The strongest memories in California actually have to do with two very committed and loving parents that I've always known would do anything for me,
Mm.
as well as 5 siblings that even though I moved around a lot growing up, I never had the same friends because I was always moving to a different city. But I always had 5 siblings that, regardless of what, could anchor in the same types of memories and experiences that I had. And we could create our own world wherever we went.
Wow. How did how did experiencing different cultures and communities from moving around when you were younger impact your upbringing?
Um, in general, like I think for me at least, when it's all you know, then it's all you know. And
Mm.
so when in general, like I think when people are young, like their school is a lot of what their outside of home experience is. So even when I was in Sacramento, I went to one school in kindergarten. I went to a different school for first and second grade, and
Right.
then third grade. But then we went to Mexico, right? And so even in California, I had different environments, and so
Right.
difference, like being different and having a different environment, actually having to acclimate really quickly is
Mm-hmm.
actually something that I've done throughout my entire life. One of the things that kicks people, every year I'm on this planet is, right now I'm on my 18th move in 17th city.
Wow.
And when I tell people about that, I was like, oh, well, acclimating and changing and shift is something that should be pretty hard. And it's like, actually, it's pretty much what I'm used to. I've done a lot of it, right? Right now, I'm in Chicago. I've been here for actually a little over 3 years now. This is the longest I've actually been anywhere as an adult. I love the city. I love the people.
Wow.
But really being able to build relationships quickly is something I had to figure out how to do early on and do so in a meaningful way because meaningful relationships matter to me. But being the new guy, it was always something that I had to work at because without it, I wouldn't be able to have the foundational things that really mattered to me, right? And so
Wow.
change is my standard. Moving around, I'm very used to it, but actually having to make relationships that matter, like building those really quickly, whether it's with peers, colleagues, or frankly, even like community members that are my new family, is something that I actually have gotten pretty good at doing relatively quickly, or at least I think so.
Nice. You do have a very outgoing personality, so I wouldn't be surprised, babe. I would not. Um, are you the oldest of your siblings?
Nope, nope, nope. So there are 6 of
Oh,
us.
okay.
I'm the fourth. So I have 2 older brothers, an older sister, and then 2 younger sisters.
Wow. How did your relationship with your siblings impact your upbringing? The love that y'all share between each other. I did look on Facebook and I see that y'all are pretty Well knit, pretty tight, man. For real.
Yeah, yeah. Some of the pictures that you would have seen would be, COVID in general. It was crazy for everyone in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, I have, two of my sisters are in the Los Angeles area. One of my sisters in New York, and not being able to see each other. Whereas, like we by design, we functionally make sure that we do see each other and talk to each other all the time. And not
Mm.
being able to have that during COVID was really challenging. And so we actually just set up a day where we said, like, even though it's COVID, let's actually fly out. We really can't go anywhere in Chicago, but let's do something we never get to do. We hired a photographer, and like we did a photo shoot of all the four of us together to commemorate some of our memories because we couldn't really go anywhere, right?
Wow.
And that's actually the trend line for my relationship with my sisters. We pretty much, because we've actually moved around so much, we've actually made our own world what we wanted it to be almost our entire lives. When we got to Mexico, we were in, an all Spanish speaking school, and we were the only Americans in the school. We were the only, individuals that actually had, this pigment in the school, and so we just stood out as different. And the
Right.
reality is, it was an amazing experience. We loved the school, but when we came home, we just created our own world. We had our imaginary
Wow.
world where we invent different lands, and we just play around and sort of thriving regardless of what, and being there to support each other regardless of what is the cornerstone. And so, frankly, one of the things that makes it more doable for me to actually move around as much as I do is I also know, regardless of what, I have the backing of three people who understand me more than anything else and will do anything for me. So I'd say, like, my relationship with my sisters is part of the gas that keeps me going all the time.
Wow. Amazing. 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 Um, with your dad, oh, excuse me, I didn't want to skip ahead. What is one lesson you learned from your parents about life that you would never forget?
Uh, there's a lot. There's a lot. Um, and I guess I'll start answering that by highlighting my dad. He died a few years ago. Um,
Hmm.
so I mean, like I spent a lot of time reflecting on all the gifts that he and my both my parents gave for me because they were very intentional parents.
Wow.
I stay saying, if I were to have kids today, and I were to
Mm.
be a fourth of what they were able to be as parents, I would be a very, very good parent. And they did this all on their own without a big surrounding community and moving us around all the time. So the biggest, I'll say the first lesson that comes to mind is, um, my parents raised us to believe that we can do anything. Um, one of the uh, One of the first things that my dad actually had us do when we were younger is, we do the call and respond. He'd say, you could do anything you, and then we have to say want to. And he'd say anywhere you, and we'd say want to. Anytime you want to. And then he'd share in the whole wide world. And then when we got, a few years older, he wouldn't make us say world, we'd have to say universe, right? And so fundamentally, it was his way of actually helping us understand that there were actually no limitations in regards to, like, what we can accomplish. And fundamentally, um, there's six of us, and we all believe that we can actually be the masters of our destiny. We all believe, regardless of the obstacles, we can do the impossible. And frankly, it drives a lot of us. But it was a lot of intentionality from before we even knew what we were doing at that point.
Wow.
And frankly, like, a lot of that drives even the work that I do in K-12 education, right? Being able to think that, entire cities and entire communities of black and brown folks have actually been underinvested in for decades and decades, frankly, since the inception of this country, can have all of the rights, benefits that they've actually never actually had access to is actually possible,
Hmm.
is actually a straight line with thinking, actually, it's possible, even if it hasn't been done yet. Now, I fundamentally know I can't do it by myself, and it's not my job to do it
This is
by
true.
myself. But it's my job to actually work part and parcel with other folks that whose community it is to actually make that a reality. But I do think that it is. Sorry, I do know that it is possible, so long as we're all marching towards that goal.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, speaking about education, I wanted to go back to you highlighting that your dad got a PhD before 30, and I want to ask you this question: with your dad at the age of 30, excuse me, with your dad getting his PhD at the age of 30, do you feel that there was any pressure for you to live up to his accomplishments directly or indirectly?
So you were right. It was before 30.
Okay.
He was a big nerd. But no, I actually never felt any pressure.
Mm.
Like, frankly, my parents,
Ooh.
one of the other things they were really intentional about is as early as I can remember, they asked us what we wanted to be. And frankly, they were less concerned about what the answer was. They were actually more making sure that we actually had an end post that we were guiding ourselves by. And so, you want to be an actor?
Mm.
Great. If you want to be a garbage collector, great. If you want to be a doctor, great. Just make sure that your intentions are to be the best one out there, and you're going to work your butt off to actually get to that point. And so, my earliest aspiration was I wanted to be an eye doctor, but then I wanted to be an actor, and then I wanted to be a basketball player. So as those things shifted, it's like, okay, show that you're really serious about that. And if you're serious about it, we're going to push you to get there. But your intention in regards to whatever that goal is to work your butt off and actually be the best. Frankly,
Hmm.
they also were very adamant about like, and I know it seems great to be a teacher in university, but don't do that pathway. Find your own way. But one thing that they were fully
And you
transparent.
did. You did. You did. I can't wait to get into your craft. Continue. I'm listening to you, babe.
But like with all that, the reality is they were always extremely supportive in making sure that we were following our dreams for our reasons and actually finding ourselves in the process. Once again, I'm just anchoring
Mm.
back on there was just a lot of intentionality, and I don't know how they did it.
Letting you be your own individual is very important. I did speak to somebody about that in terms of when they was raising a newborn. It was like, I want to teach him to be great and teach him to be good, but I don't want to start to steer his life the way that I would like it to be. I want him to still be his own individual. And that's what it sounds like your parents accomplished. Amazing. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Do you believe in the American dream, first and foremost? I wanted to get into that because I read inside your bio that your father did give you the what they would consider to be the American dream. But I wanted to hear from your opinion. Is that something that you believe in? I once heard in order for you to believe in the American dream, you have to be asleep. So I was just wondering,
You have
what
to be a
is
what?
asleep is what someone said. Yeah, that's what I once heard. So I just was curious about
Yeah.
how you feel about that.
There's a lot packed into that question, and frankly, there's a lot to unpack with fully answering that question. Like, frankly, like we could do a whole conversation on just that by itself. Um, and frankly, it also depends on what you define as the American dream, right? For what I was saying was like I had two parents that came from countries with significantly less resources than the United
Mm-hmm.
States has. They moved here. They got an education. They found each other. They had six kids. They became professors. They had jobs. They had the house. All of those things that are the picture of what the American dream is. And frankly, um, I won't even say from my personal knowledge on this. I do a lot of reading and I learn a lot through other folks. And so for anyone who's listening to this, like take a look at the writings that Noam Chomsky has come out with over the past few decades. Really smart guy. But part of what he's highlighting as he's doing his assessment over generations is, in general, when folks talk about the American dream, what we're talking about is the ability to, if you work your butt off, being able to achieve more financially, successfully than the prior
Mm.
generation. And some of what
Mm.
he's highlighting in his longitudinal analysis is that the last time that was the case was the 80s. And
Mm.
fundamentally, because the systems and structures that are in place, it's been increasingly harder for the next generation to do better than the prior generation. And
Right.
in the space in which, this is more my translation now, in the space in which we're actually saying, well, actually, everybody's individual decisions are actually what makes this possible or not, it actually takes away the systems that are in place that either increase or decrease that likelihood. Interest rates can go up,
Mm.
housing costs can go up, the cost for an education can go up. But if your ability to earn doesn't go up commensurately, then your ability to access those decreases commensurately as well. And that's something that is happening without your level of control. Now, the other aspect to add to that, one of the other aspects to add to that is it also takes away the aspect of race. That is actually very real, and it's been a part of this country as long as the country has been in existence. And the reality is so long as race has been in existence, then socioeconomics has also been tied to that. And so it's always been harder for, in general, the African American population to have access to the things that are the American dream because of the obstacles that are in place systemically, as well as individually, because systems perpetuated over time are individual actions, right? And so it's decreasingly likely to be able to access over time. It's harder to do, and it always has been harder to access if you are a part of the group that the American group is not built for, i.e. White males.
Right.
And so it's possible, but it's increasingly hard. It's possible, but it's increasingly hard to do. And it was actually not designed initially and in principle for folks who it wasn't designed for, i.e. always going to be harder for you if you're Latino, Latinx, always going to be harder for you if you are African American, always going to be harder for you if you are, frankly, even female.
I really enjoyed hearing your answer. I'll be honest with you, I did. That was great. That was great. That's why I wanted to ask you that question in particular. What have you learned about yourself from your relationships with your siblings?
I'd say my if I were to put in rank order my greatest teachers in life, it would be like my parents, just tying themselves in, mom and dad at one. And then it would actually be my siblings. You know, frankly, there are very few people. My youngest sister, for example, my oldest sister, for example, like when I actually look for motivation, when it's a really hard time and I'm actually finding it hard to find the energy to sort of keep on pushing and chugging for optimism, I actually look at, my siblings that are dreamers. And continue to push through and trudge through regardless of the hardships because they know that it's possible. And they know that, frankly, if it's been done, there's no reason why they can't do it. And they also know that if it's never been done, there's no reason why they can't be the first ones. And that doesn't make any of it any easier. But because they believe it, because they see it, and because they're doing it, it gives me the ammo that I need at different points to actually keep on pushing on with my dream.
Wow.
And so there's a lot to unpack even in that answers your question. It's like, well, what have I learned about myself? It's like at times I've learned like how much support I need from others, more specifically like from people who actually know me and see me and get me in different ways. And I can always get that from them, whether it's talking with them or actually just walking them and seeing them do what they do on a daily basis. And frankly, trudging through the challenges that, are commensurate with being able to try to do impossible things. My youngest sister, she left the corporate world in her 20s and decided, hey, I want to help people find themselves through like personal training. She opened up her own business. And she's doing really well right now. And it creates the space like where, she is working with women women and males, but, there's a passion in her to sort of say like women who are able to sort of like build themselves physically and understand how to better take care of themselves. Tying all that in together helps them like have a stronger presence and grounding in who they are. And she wants to be a part of that. And so regardless of what her pushing and trudging through that, like helps me see her dream coming to life. And when I'm having challenges with seeing mine, for whatever reason, being able to look to that example of like, there's the big North Star that she's going for. Here's the challenges I know she's running through, but she's going for it anyways. what are you really facing? What's really going on inside? And frankly, being able to talk with folks through that also shows me like a mirror to where I'm personally vulnerable, spaces where I
Mm,
need to grow. So it's also great to have people that can be that kind of mirror.
amazing. I like the way that y'all play off of one another and have your own community within your family. That's beautiful. A lot of people can learn from that. What is one thing you can teach people about winning in a system that permeates racism?
I'm going to be honest, man. Like I
Take your time.
there's a lot even packed into the framing of what winning is. Um,
I like
uh,
the way you took it back there. That's good. That's good. I like that mindset.
I wouldn't say my guess, Troy, like my guess is that if
Hmm.
you and I were to sort of have a conversation offline about like what winning looked like for, the community you grew up with in New York, or the communities I've lived in across the country, the community that you work with in Florida, my guess is we probably sync up on like what we wanted success to look like, right? Financially, educational, in regards to like wealth, in regards to like jobs. And my guess is also if you and I sat down, we extended that table and we started talking with other like young people, elders in the community about like what they wanted, like we would probably get synced up really, really quickly. Um, but my guess is also how that's operationalized when we say like, hey, well, Bing, you're working in education in a system. How often do you get to that point where like that vision is realized? I have yet to see it happen. And so I can say like professionally and personally, I've had a lot of meaningful wins. Um,
Mm.
but I've
Ooh.
never seen success the way that it's necessary, the way that we talk about it. When we say like, black and brown communities in
Hmm.
communities that have been chronically under resourced, needing access to opportunities to take advantage of the tomorrow and the great American dream, being able to see that like as a system we have, and I've been a part of creating more exceptions to the rule.
Hmm.
But in mass, like we haven't seen, and I haven't seen, and frankly, as a country, we haven't been able to put together communities in mass where we're actually seeing that happen wide scale,
Wow.
right? And so the type of success that, like, I can't teach people about how to achieve what it is that I'm trying to go for, or toward what you and I would talk about trying to go towards. I can
Right.
say, here's steps that I've taken, and here's how I've known that I was on the right path. And frankly, it's largely because, like, when I'm working and engaging with community members, like, we're syncing up, and here's what we're driving towards, and we're on the same page with. Let's just keep on going. And we have this plan, and we're taking steps, and we're getting closer and closer. But have we ever gotten there in mass? Like, no, no, we've gotten closer. We've taken meaningful steps, and that's a part of it. Um, but at the time in which I actually have that answer for you, this country will be a different place.
I have
Um,
another question for you, but continue.
but I mean, overall, the lesson for me in that is actually one about perseverance. Like the type of
Mm.
issue, like for me, like the place where I've decided to spend my life and actually impacting um, the wealth, the opportunity gap for Black and Brown communities is K-12 education, and that's where I'm spending my life, and that's where I'm spending all my brain power. Um, and the fact is that if we rewind another like 50 to 60 years back and we say like, well, how much more successful are we now than before? It's like, well, frankly, as a system, we haven't done a really good job, right? Um, we have, if we take into account like all the different metrics that actually translate to capitalist success, for example, we say, okay, if we go
Hmm.
back to the 50s and the 60s, is there more or less black home ownership? It's like, it's about the same. If we take into account, like wealth or income, we would also say, if you take into account inflation, actually, it really hasn't budged all that much. If we say, okay,
Mm.
what about the criminal justice system? We say, Well, actually, that's really skyrocketed, and we're actually doing worse than we're doing in the 50s and 60s, right? Um, and so, saying like we're going from like, even in regards to schools, like actually we're almost as segregated, if not just as segregated as we were back then. Academic performance, what's happening is like we really weren't measuring all that, but COVID just happened, and we're back another 2 decades on the
Mm,
gaps that exist between whites and blacks, for example, right? And so, in a number of spaces, like we have not seen the type of progress that we get excited about. We've seen some exceptions to the rule that actually highlight that this is possible, but we're not seeing the type of success. And fundamentally, I think it's very grounding to be transparent about what we're really trying to solve for. Like when we're trying to solve an
mm,
education, we're not really trying to solve a school problem. We're actually trying to solve hundreds of years of systemic racism and being able to get young people ahead of that entire curve.
mm,
But if that's what we're really trying to solve for, then the reality is we also have to adhere to all the other aspects that are relevant to that young person and their communities, right? And so that's a lot in itself, and that's nothing that a school system can take on by themselves. That's nothing that a healthcare system. There's nothing that an individual mayor can take on themselves. It's actually a full court, all hands on deck type of support initiative. But we don't really treat
wow.
these issues that way. And so
Can,
perseverance
oh,
is actually
mhm.
one of the lessons that's actually necessary to do any of this work in a comprehensive way. But it's also being able to be really transparent about what the issue is we're really solving. Because if, for example, in education, we say, actually, we're just fixing a school challenge, we're never going to get there. Our communities have actually been challenged for way too long. And unless
Mm.
we're actually solving all the challenges that a students face that are actually around the school at the same time as we're making the school environment better,
Oh, I have a
we're
question
missing
for that. I have
critical
a question for
aspects.
that. I really want to dive into your craft.
Do
I feel
it.
like we're getting there. It's getting itchy, but I do have one more question for you,
Yeah.
Bing. You said meaningful wins, and I wanted to have you make a distinction between wins and meaningful wins, right? Because oftentimes, let's say we could be scrolling through somebody's social media and we'll see what appears to be a win, but that doesn't mean to them that it meant anything, right? So,
Mhm.
what is that? What defines a meaningful win to you versus just winning? What is the contrast?
Yeah. So Troy, so once again, I have to rewind back. So like anytime anyone's having a conversation, like it's useful for folks to anchor in like what are we really trying to solve for, right? And so for me, when I'm rewinding back to that, like when I'm rewinding back to that, and I'm sitting down with folks in different districts and different cities, and we say, here's what we want for our kids and for our communities. Great, that's the North Star. So a win would be getting to that North Star. And if we're not at that North Star where all our kids and communities actually have access to that, then we haven't gotten there. Period. That's it. Right.
Right,
Now, if we're on a pathway to getting there, it's like, okay, so we're taking steps, so we're getting closer, but are we there? No.
right.
Because in any other aspect of life, like if you're in a race, it's like, well, I want to win this race. Like, did you win the race? No. Okay. Well, then we know whether you did what you're supposed to, right? And so if that North Star is, you know, overcoming the wealth gap, if it is actually unprecedented levels of graduation, whatever that is, like until we're there and we're there consistency in a way that would have demolished hundreds of years of oppression,
Mm,
then great. But that I don't see anywhere. And frankly, I also know I've worked on and I've worked with a number of amazing people that have sort of like had that as the end goal, and we take steps to getting closer. Those steps are meaningful wins because it takes a while to get there. Like one of the
I like that.
well, thank you.
You're
One of the really
welcome.
bad
I really
jokes
love the way you brought that together, though. Continue, Big.
One of the really bad jokes that I got when I walked in the K-12 education space is because, like, by nature, like, I think all this stuff is possible and I want it to happen because our kids and our communities deserve nothing less. And so it created a space where I just get overly frustrated because why can't we just be there? And one of my mentors shared this really bad joke and said, what's the best way to eat an elephant? And I just like let the awkwardness sit there. Well, that look on your face, it's priceless. And it's like, and it's a piece at a time. Once again, it's a bad joke. It's a bad joke. I know. Look, I called it out beforehand, man. So it's a horrible joke, but it also is the only way to eat an elephant. And if over a lifetime you take it piece by piece, there's a chance in which you actually get there. But if you don't start because the whole thing is so big that you can't do anything, then you'll never get there, right? Um, and so, like, when I think about meaningful wins, like I'll rewind back and because of the work that I do and because I'm really lucky to be able to work alongside a lot of amazing leaders, I'll say, hey, when I was at Chicago Public Schools, I worked with a few amazing chiefs and a great superintendent that actually said, hey, we want to create a space where more students with disabilities actually have access to the best high schools in the country, because Chicago actually has some of the best high schools in the country, but there
Wow.
aren't as many students with disabilities that have access to that. How do we take those walls down? And the reality is, we had like a leader from the top down and said, this is a priority for me. I had some peer chiefs that said, like, let's actually make that happen. That's an amazing idea, and we can actually do it. How do we align and work ourselves? And then we said, hey, principals. And the principal said, we're passionate about this too. It was a lot of hard work, but we actually saw unprecedented levels of like these families with youth actually applying and getting in than we ever had been before, because it was a priority for us, right?
Wow.
Now, I consider that a meaningful step, a meaningful win, right?
Amazing.
That same year, those same folks, like, we got together and we said, hey, for some of these greatest high schools, how do we take down some of the barriers? So whether it's selective enrollment high schools, whether it's some of the programs that are most demanded all across the city,
Hmm.
international baccalaureate program, can we take down some of the barriers that actually make it more challenging for these families to access schools that will increase the likelihood of families that normally like don't get in to get in and be able to attend? And the answer was a heck yes, right? When we saw unprecedented levels of black and brown students, families from under-resourced communities being able to access these opportunities that didn't exist before. Now, I consider that a meaningful win. That's taking a bite. That's eating an elephant one piece at a time. But without these little wins,
Mm.
we never get to the bigger ones. So we're getting there closely. But have we reached that goal anywhere? From where I'm sitting, I haven't.
Mm. Oh,
Like, that goal
so
keeps me going, but I transparently haven't.
I wanted to bring it back to an array of questions that I would like to ask you before this interview is through. I see you worked in investment banking straight out of undergrad. Can you tell us what investment banking is for those who don't know at all? Like myself,
Yeah.
I don't know nothing about investment banking.
Yeah, sure.
Continue.
And full transparency, so I was on the business analysis and information technology side, but straight out of undergrad, I worked for Merrill Lynch when Merrill Lynch was a standalone investment bank, not a part of Bank of America. And
Wow.
essentially, the engine that a lot of this country works on is through investment banking. We live in a capitalistic society. In order for capitalism to work, money needs to be invested to actually grow what's working, scale down what's not, and actually put money into things that seem promising that will potentially have more earnings and growth that will propel everything to move ahead. Right? There are companies that
Hmm.
already exist. There are small cap, large cap. Sorry, there are big companies that already exist. They need more to keep on doing amazing stuff. There are small companies that need more capital to continue to do to scale up and actually do more of what we think is promising. All of the financing and the money that's necessary to do that creates jobs is what the investment banking industry fuels. Um,
Wow.
and so, once again, like, oversimplified, we live in a capitalistic society. A lot of the funding that actually makes capitalism move is actually through the investment banking spaces, places like J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, etc. And out of undergrad, I was lucky to be able to have an opportunity to work at Merrill Lynch.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you for that beautiful explanation. I now understand what investment banking is. What inspired you to put together a financial literacy program for middle school students while working in the field of investment banking?
Ooh, okay. So Troy, we're gonna tie back to my sister again. So this is like my oldest sister. So one of my superpowers that I learned really, really quickly And so I'm very rarely the smartest person in a room, but I'm actually also very likely the person who will learn faster than most people in any room, right? And so when I got to Merrill Lynch, it was great at the beginning, right? I had like a few months of like training with like 52 peers from all across the world, and we were like, just drinking in new knowledge in over my head and then where I needed to be. And then we got placed in our full-time roles, and that was, once again, it was drinking through a fire hose. It was, how do you figure out like this new project that's going to be yours for whoever knows what amount of time? There's a lot in there, but I got past the learning curve really, really quickly. And when I'm not learning new things, I don't have as much fuel, right? And so frankly, like personally, I was not as fulfilled at that window, even though I love New York City. And my oldest sister, we were on the phone, and she's like, "How are you doing?" It's like, "I'm great." He's like, "No, you're not." It's like, "How did she call my bluff?" Like, there were no FaceTimes at the time. It's like, how did she call me like that, right? In reality, like, look, I don't have any gas right now. Like, I don't know what's going on. It's like, well, what did you do today that brought you joy? What did you do today that made you happy? And it's like, I don't, I don't think I did anything. He's like, okay, well, what are you gonna do tomorrow for 15 minutes that's gonna make you happy? He's like, well, I really don't have any time. It's like, you're telling me you don't have 15 minutes to make yourself happy tomorrow. It's like, okay, when you put it that way, it sounds really irresponsible. It's like, okay, I'm going to go for a jog for 15 minutes tomorrow. And then she called me back after I went for a jog. She's like, so how do you feel? Like, a little better. It's like, so what are you going to do for 30 minutes? Like, now you're pushing it, right? But she worked on holding me accountable to making sure I was finding things that brought me joy in my day, right?
Mm.
That translated into, okay, I'm not fully getting all the fuel that I need out of my job, but what do I have access to in this space? And like Sponsored for Educational Opportunity is one of the programs that got me to New York the first time around. And for anybody watching, if you are a black or brown male or female that has an interest in anything in the investment banking space, Sponsored for Educational Opportunity is an amazing program. 300 of us that we junior and university, we from all around the country. We were in New
Mm.
York in investment banks for the first time, and lots of us were used to giving and volunteering when we were undergrads, but now we're working these jobs where we were just working way too much and didn't really have time to do anything. It's like, great. So there are people, right? So one piece of a puzzle, right? At the time, Merrill Lynch also had this award-winning curriculum called Investing Pays Off. Like, who makes investing lessons interesting? Is like, I don't know, Merrill Lynch found a way to do it and actually got it onto Sesame Street, and they're winning awards for it. It's like, okay, so we have curriculum. That's great, right? I and another colleague of mine, like we were actually helping to lead some of the Black professional network between New York and New Jersey. And so like there was a way for being able to say like, great, how do we channel like even like Merrill Lynch volunteering resources? So like there were puzzle pieces.
Wow.
Keep in mind, like I piece puzzles together, right? And so in that space, like so we have people who want to volunteer. We have a curriculum, and we actually have a way to actually leverage in something that can impact folks because Merrill Lynch is in New York and they have access to things like New York Cares, et cetera, right? So tying all those together, what we ended up finding was like, okay, so if we tie that together, then what we actually have is during New York Cares, like we can actually like access middle school students because Merrill Lynch can get us access to that. We can take all these volunteers who want to volunteer and engage and get them into classrooms. And we can actually use this curriculum that's targeted at middle school students to actually make it very real, right? Those were like that was the hand that was out there. We just pieced it together. And frankly, by the time we actually had kickoff, once again, I saw light like this was like the worst possible equation from where I was sitting. Like I didn't realize until until the morning that it kicked off, I was like, wait a second, this is summer. It's like 9 a.m. We're having middle school students actually come into a classroom to learn about investment banking, but they have no idea what it is. Like, who wants to do this on who wants to do this on Saturday morning? But buses came in, the kids were engaged, the volunteers had an amazing time. I know my life lit up, right? And seeing like the hands raised, like I don't get what you're saying, but I want to get it, and that sounds interesting and helpful for me. So like, I'm curious to learn more. It's like I will stay here as long as you want me to. Like I am lit right now, right? Um,
Wow.
And so, like, it started because of my sister pushing and prodding to find joy. And for anybody listening, like, I just encourage everyone to make sure they're doing things that bring them joy, because
Mm.
it's coming from somewhere. And frankly, like, mine translated into, actually, I'm going to do work that I think I was put here to do because it brings me joy. And now I'm working with schools and districts and communities all across the country to scale up high quality opportunities.
Wow. I love the way you said that. I wanted to ask something that is very important, I think, for people to know is how did you transition from um, living, how did you transition from working a full-time job that you used to kind of basically get by to working with your passion full-time? Yes,
Um,
indeed.
so I don't have an answer that's going to be really useful or helpful because I actually had a very weird pathway, right? So
That's fine.
fundamentally, I'll say at the core, it's very rare that there's an ability to have all those answers up front. I.e., in retrospect, I can say here's actually how it played out. At the time, I didn't necessarily know how. I just knew that I was in something that didn't necessarily fully fit me, and I knew that there was a
Mm.
space to do something that I knew that I wanted to do something that was more in line with that volunteer experience. I didn't know how to, right? But I fundamentally believe, how things happen for a reason, right? And for me, it's like, okay, so if I want to work with kids, do I have to go to school to become a teacher? It's like, well, that's not my skill set, right? So if I actually have assets, what exactly are those assets? And then I landed out, I don't know. I guess I'll figure it out later on. And what I ended up doing in that window was what lots of people who worked on Wall Street did when they don't necessarily know what they're going to do. I went to grad school. Um, Serendipitously at the same time, there was a program when I was an undergrad that I did a semester abroad, and they did an SOS. They did some outreach to some alum to say like, hey, if you come back to actually work for the undergrad program, then you can be in Italy for 2 years and go to grad school. And so I get to get my MBA, time to figure out what I want to do, get to be in Italy for 2 years. Oh my God, the food. Oh my God, the people. And so I went to grad school for 2 years. It was based around
Wow.
business. It was not based around anything in education. But the way that things serendipitously played out is, I was working with a group of folks. The leadership at Chimba that was the program that I
Hmm.
did. It's through the University of Kansas. That's through the University of Iowa right now, but they were
Oh, wow.
very intentional about building leaders that could walk into jobs and take and actually train to do the things that they needed to do, i.e., we're not just going to give them knowledge. We're going to help them make better decisions, solve problems, etc. But we also like need them to have a better understanding of like how they show up in situations, how they persuade, motivate, assist, and inspire other people because that's what that's a lot of what management really is, right? And so we
Hmm.
fundamentally were building modules on like how to get undergrads and grad students to be able to do that. As I was going through that, we ended up identifying, hey, we need coaches to be able to work with these undergrads and executive leaders, so that they can actually do more of that introspective and development work. And frankly, human sorry, wise true. Like this is how I got in touch with Carla Picardi, who I've seen you've also done an interview with. Um,
Yes.
she was
Amazing
one
to
of
me.
the first people that we pulled on as a coach because of the wealth of knowledge that she has, the experience, because of her passion, because she's freaking good at it, right? That's a plug to
Wow.
check out the other human conversation folks. Um,
Yes,
but
definitely. Yes.
as I was going through my personal coaching reality with Carla, I also, for the first time, said, like, I want to do this education thing. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know how to get there. And Carla was like, oh, that's what you wanted. I had no idea. You've never even talked about this. Let me put you in touch with some people in London who are, sirs who actually work in education or actually solving these issues in the UK. I was like, really? Uh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thanks for the hookup. Yeah, let's do that, right? And like begets like. I sort of like went there. I met some folks. They introduced me to some more folks. Frankly, when I got done with my MBA, I sponsored my own visa. I moved to the UK without a job. I kept on interviewing, and
Mm.
eventually, I started working at a small educational consultancy. called Bryanston Square. That was 12 people. I was the only American there.
If you don't
But we
mind me
got
asking, if you don't mind me asking, how was it living in the UK and the difference of the cultures between the United States and the UK?
I think my answer would have been really different if I moved from the US to the UK and actually didn't go from the US to Italy to the UK. Um, I'd already been in a place that was not the United States for a while and was actually further from the United States than the UK actually was in regards to like culture, history, etc. I
Right,
think it would also be different if, you know, I had a really amazing support network over there. Like, frankly, I met some of the most amazing people working there. Uh,
wow,
and frankly, they were from all over the world. Like, my closest friends over there from like all over Africa, they're from India, a huge cohort from all over the US. And, that actually helped me to see, I don't know, how big and how small the world is at the same time, right? Everybody that was in my peer group from all around the world, they were all looking to do amazing things eventually and amazing things right now. They're also looking to like have transformative experiences and have all these relationships, right? And so we all needed each other, and so we built a really meaningful space really, really quickly. So my U.S. experience in the UK was an expat experience with a lot of peer people from all around the world who are actually looking for that same level of connection and actually had equal levels of aspiration for transforming their own countries and world eventually. And frankly, a lot of them are doing it. Like very much like I shared that I
wow.
leverage my relationship with my sisters as motivation. One of my closest friends from that window, Sheikh Sinankoa, like he's back in Ivory Coast doing all the things he said he wanted to do when we first met. And like I visited him right before COVID and actually being able to see is like we talked about it, but now there's this big mall and this community that you were talking about, and it's transforming life and it's bringing new revenue, it's bringing new jobs and opportunities. Like, how did you do it? It's like, been working on it my whole life, right? Um,
Wow.
so re-anchoring back to like the living the dream and actually, I don't know if this is the American dream, but it's a dream, right? It's a dream, and like he had that inside of him, like ever since I first knew him, and we were in our, mid to late 20s, and now he's doing it. Um, I knew in my mid 20s that education was something that was a calling. I didn't know what it meant or what it needed to look like. Now I'm doing it. Um, so I'm living my dream. Um, I'm not sure if it's the American dream, but I think there's
But it's your
something
dream,
to. But
and
but
that's what
I do
counts.
think there's something to being able to like sort of live your dream, live your truth, and actually be in partnership with other people that are doing the same thing because they can help propel.
I love the way you said that. Yes, sir, they can. Yes, sir. I think a lot of people need to hear that, especially living in the Western culture where we're taught individualism and I have to get somewhere, I have to do for me, and oftentimes we forget the we equation. And I like the way that you implemented it, that it takes a community and a team to actually make things happen. It doesn't. It doesn't start. You can't accomplish your dream with just by yourself. People have to open
Hmm.
doors, collaborate with you, talk to others about what you're doing, word of mouth. So, yes, indeed. I definitely thank you for highlighting that. Moving forward, I do have a lot of questions here. When you returned to the States working with the state of New Jersey to build their office of portfolio management, I want to make sure I get that correct.
Hmm.
Um, for those who don't know, what is the Office of Portfolio Management and Education, and why is it important?
Yeah. So portfolio management means something very different by industry. It means something very different in education, and it means something very different depending on what your city looks like. So very much like I built Office of Portfolio Management for the state of New Jersey, I also built Chicago Public Schools Office of Portfolio Management, and they look very different because every ecosystem in every city has a very, very different tool. Has very
Mm,
different tools, very different ecosystems, very different politics. Overall, the essence of what's being solved for is kind of the same. Um, in New Jersey, the state had pulled together a priority school list, i.e., the schools that are the absolute worst performing in the entire state of New Jersey.
mm-hmm.
I think there were 72 of them. And so the 72 schools were the bottom 5% of the worst performing schools in the state. And being able to
Right.
build the state system for how are we getting these schools better, was at the core. Like, what are the different things the state can do to support those schools, districts, communities to actually getting those schools to the level of performance that we talk about and aspire to. That was what the office that's the question the office was designed to solve, right? But once again,
Nice.
the levers that exist in a place like New Jersey are very different than levers that exist in places like Louisiana, very different than a place like Chicago and Illinois. And so being able to say, like, so what's the North Star that we're going for? What are the policy tools, the resource tools, the people tools, and how do they actually play out? And how can they be played out in a way that's going to get us to that end goal of great schools for every kid? That's always at the core of what's being solved for.
Wow.
So that's what portfolio management means. Like, once again, in New Jersey, it was bottom 5% of the lowest performing schools. How do we get those types of transformational solutions we're talking about?
Interesting. Wow. What is a priority school?
So
And how are schools, my bad, it's a two-part question, I'm sorry. What is a priority school and how are schools categorized in the education field?
So sorry, what was the last part?
What is a priority school and how are schools prioritized in the field of education? Let me rephrase the end part there.
Okay, I'm going to answer the first one really quickly, and as I'm answering the first one, I'm going to need to pick your brain on when you say, like, how are schools prioritized, because
I mean,
there's actually a lot of
categorized, excuse me, is what I meant.
categorized.
Yeah,
Okay.
how would it categorize? Because I've heard F, D, they got like letters for the school system. Am I correct?
It
Like
depends.
an F school, a D
It
school.
depends.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So it
Interesting.
depends on a state by state, a district by district level. So
Okay.
overall, like what a priority school is the federal government has this national
Mhm.
assessment. And essentially, if you're receiving federal funds, then all public schools actually have to have their students take NAEP assessment. Now,
Interesting.
what you get from the NAEP assessment is which schools actually have students that are at the highest levels of proficiency, which students are at lower levels of proficiency, etc. Which schools really just have all their students in some of the lower levels of achievement, etc. And the schools that actually have those highest levels of concentration in the state, so priority schools are schools that are the bottom 5% of academic performance in their state. Those are that is the federal definition for what a priority school is.
Wow.
And so, like, full circle, the office that I was designing, and once again, I built with a group of amazing leaders in New Jersey, was what supports should be and need to be in place so that as a state Department of Education, we can comprehensively get ourselves to the goal that we're all aspiring towards, a great school for every one of these kids.
Mm.
Now, you asked how are they categorized or prioritized?
Yeah. How are how are schools categorized? So they got private, charter. I know some of them go by letters, a F, a D division school. I never understood how they reached those conclusions as to how they're going to categorize that. Is that based on the area surrounding the school? Is that based on the people that they want to attend the school? I know there could be different parameters to how that's achieved.
All right. Wise Truth, there is so much to unpack with, like, fully answering that question. And so I'm going to try to be as concise as possible. So first off, yes, there are private schools. So there are non-public schools and there are public schools, right? So non-public school is a school that you have to pay tuition to go to, that actually does not fall within a public education system, right? So those
Right.
might be religious schools. Those might be schools that are private. Families with lots of economic means are actually like paying tuition for their kids to go there, etc. Private side, and then there's the public side. And if you're the public side, the reality is you can't charge tuition. But but you are like the public actually funds the education. And that breaks into
Mm.
two oversimplified buckets, and there's some gray in between. The two oversimplified buckets are where you're going to be traditional district school and traditional district public school, or you're going to be a charter public school. A traditional district public school is under the umbrella of a school district that actually governs all of it, and a charter public school is actually under a different contract with the authorizer, whether it be a district, state, university, etc. It's saying,
Mm-hmm.
actually, we're going to hold you accountable to making sure that learning is happening and students are achieving, but you can do it in a way that does not align with the way the district is doing it. So we're going to make sure the goal is the same, but how you get there can actually be different. That is what the charter is, right? So different types of schools. Now, with that, even on the private school, even in the non-public school side, there are
Mm-hmm.
spaces where some non-public schools say, well, if the state policy allows, then we are going to support students that are in traditional public schools. But then the state says, well, you have to test them, and then we'll give you dollars that actually follow the students as well, right? And so there's some intermingling there, but it depends on a state. Like that shifts on a state by state basis because
Mm.
policy is different, right? So that's one part of your question. The other part of your question is about how schools are categorized as it pertains to success metrics, and frankly, like that's a really that's a dicey question um, because
It's the first time I heard that one.
because it cuts into, well, what do you define as success, right? And actually, what are you doing based off of who is deemed not successful or not? Are you taking things away, or are you giving more support? Because if a school said if students are performing worse, one could argue that they might need access to more resources. So are you giving more? Are you taking more? What does that look like, right? So what are you doing with the information, right? But in general,
Mm.
like the federal government has a way with NAEP to be able to say, like, here are the districts, here are the schools that actually aren't performing as well on this nationally standardized test. None of that actually
Mm.
highlights a grade for a school. It's just, here's the reality: proficient, not proficient, on a scale. Depending on the data systems that exist in a state or even a district, because information differs, depending on the data that exists, like some places are able to say, like, here is how a school is performing in regards to growing its young people. Here is actually how a
Mm.
school is performing in regards to just an absolute level where the kids are, right? Being able to say, here's where a kid is at already versus here's how good of a job I do at growing kids. Those are very different things you're looking at, right?
Right.
Um, but
Wow.
Tennessee has a system that says, okay, well, if you're like, we're going to give you, we have enough data and our systems are such that we can give you a scale of a 1 to 5 on how you're performing. Chicago Public Schools has a way to be able to say you're going to be a 1, 1+, 2, 2+, or a 3 level school. And when I was here, we were working on sort of shifting that a lot, and the team and the board and all the stakeholders are working on shifting a lot of that to actually have a more comprehensive picture. Louisiana has an A through F scale, right? So it differs on a city by city and a district by district basis. The bigger question is how much data actually exists to be able to like make these conclusions, and frankly, more importantly, what are you doing with the information you actually have, and how are you using that to
Mm.
drive towards the types of goals we're talking about? Are we going to use the A through F, 1 through 5, to say, here's a school that actually has the most need, and so we're going to provide the most support? Or does it mean that here's a school who actually has the most need, and so we're going to take more away? Historically, we've done a lot of the latter, not the former.
Mm. What? There's one thing that I was thinking about while you was talking that kind of came to mind for sure, or that comes to mind, especially when we're talking about how schools are classified and how that plays into the area, the surrounding area. Why is it important that communities get involved in the schools in their neighborhood?
Okay, Wise Truth. Um, what would your life be if you didn't have your family?
To be quite honest, it would be in disarray because I wouldn't have structure.
So, if you just had your school and not your family, what would your life be?
I feel like it would be rigid. And the reason why it would be rigid is because it's more school, and even though you can find a family base there, I feel like family produces, or family usually instills you with something that you can't find in school, which is a certain level of love and forgiveness that they could, treat you with, a certain level of compassion that I feel like you can't get at school. It's a job at the end of the day. So,
Okay, Wise Truth. So if your school was doing amazing stuff and your family was engaged, then what does that provide to you?
it provides a foundation, and it makes me also feel like I'm being reinforced, or what I'm learning is being reinforced in its support. So the support is the carrying factor for me to want to go to school and continue to be educated too, both in school and out of school, both.
And Wise Truth, what if they actually work together symbiotically, right? What if there was a space where like schools were very intentional about how they engaged parents, they were sharing of information. Here's what's really working with Troy. Here's the issue that he ran into in school. Can you actually enforce that when we actually get home? What if there was that level of communication and engagement? What would that have done to
I
your
think that I think that it would give way to learning. It would actually give way to both the parents and the school learning about what is best for me in terms of the way that I learn, that they can help me progress in my journey of education. So,
and that's the answer why. That's why families and community. That's why it's important to engage families and communities in schoolwork. The reality is we have a tendency. There is a tendency to say, well, schools just solve school problems, but the reality is, like when we're talking about the places that actually need the most academic support and investment in this country, they are communities that have been chronically underinvested in, period. And a lot of those are Black and brown communities, right? And so, like, as you were talking about your experience, like, you're not talking about, just the school thing. It's like, if I'm living and working in a community where my parents are working multiple jobs, and so I get home and I don't have any communication with them, and frankly, wasn't able to pay a certain bill, and so I don't actually have breakfast, and so I go to school hungry. It is reasonable to assume that a young person is going to be really challenged and frustrated when they get to school, right? And so
right.
it was like, but with that, I just talked about nutrition. I talked about like family incomes can tie to wealth if you want to, right? We talked about the support that connect all those things together. And in the places that have the most need, they're all connected. Except for when you say, well, we're just going to deal with one and just deal with the school, then we're only going to support one need of the student. And if that student's hungry, guess what? They're not going to be able to study. And that totally makes sense, right? And so in the space in which we're actually touching every aspect of what makes the student's world real, only in that space are we going to be able to have the comprehensive systems levels types of support that we actually need in these types of communities, because the reality is all of these things have been taken away from these places or potentially never even given, right? And so the community is a huge part of the answer, and great schools is part of the answer, and only in the symbiosis of both of them together can we get to the type of solutions that we want. Also, we need to make sure there's the investment there to support and enable all of this work over time.
Wow. Amazing answer, by the way. What has been the most challenging aspect of working in the education system?
I'm going to give you the best, and I'm going to give you the worst. I'm going to give you the best because the best part for me is I've worked with some of the smartest, most passionate community warriors I have ever engaged with because I've worked in the education space, right? There's one thing to say hey, I'm an investment bank and here's what I'm doing as a job. Great. And totally making a difference the way they need to make a difference. People saying, actually, I'm choosing to dedicate my life to supporting communities that actually need more, not less, have historically received less and not more, and I want to be a part of that, and that's a bottom line of who I am in making those decisions. Like, well, that's a pretty solid lowest common denominator. Like, even if I don't agree with you, I can agree with you, right? And
Mm.
that's one of the biggest blessings of actually working in the education space. Even if we have different approaches to doing this work, we're actually grounded in a bigger why. We might not agree with the right way to get there, but like that's a pretty solid big why. One of the most challenging things is, frankly, I think too often we do. I get why it happens, but we don't speak truth to what the issue that we're really solving for is, right? We say like,
Mm.
hey, we're trying to like go towards that big vision that we talked about. Once again, broken
Mm-hmm.
record, like a community where like all these kids are thriving, and like we've never had. So we're taking this region of the city that's never received investment, always received like nothing, always had things taken away from them. Is like, and we're going to have
Mm.
unprecedented levels of growth by just fixing schools. It's like, well, okay, but that's actually not the challenge. Like that's one of the challenges. And unless we're actually fixing everything else around it, we actually cannot get to that goal. And so I get why we
Mm.
do it. We do it to oversimplify. We do it because there's a locus of control issue. We do it because we try to do everything and you can't do anything. But at best, in those equations, we create spaces where, well, we can create more exceptions to the rule. But can we ever get to that goal? No. And that's a conversation that many of us believe, but few of us have, and few of us act on. But once again, like wise truth, like that's the goal. Like
Wow.
that's the American dream, right? Every one of us, like regardless of who we are, creed, color, experience, um, being able to actually have access to all the resources and the richest empire in the world has ever seen. Now, we don't design our solutions that way. We could, right?
Mm.
But
Interesting.
but that's the flip side of not but that's some of the frustration, right? It's like what we're trying, like we're saying here's what we're trying to do, but we're changing this one thing, and this won't get there. So are we trying to get there? Or are we just trying to fix this thing? Let's be clear on what we're really trying to solve for. And so I'm the annoying person who always pulls us back to that picture.
Wow. But it's important to do that because a lot of people sometimes don't talk about the issue, but they'll talk around the issue, which in itself is interesting. Wow. Wow.
And
I
frankly,
really like that part of the
pressure.
conversation because I feel like there's a lot of people step softly around a lot of things, especially in the professional realm, and it leaves people sometimes not wanting to take things head on and in the fear of being not political or not being politically correct. Excuse me. Yeah. So
And who's challenged because like so who doesn't receive what they need because of an inability to have those conversations?
the people who really need those things. Yes, indeed.
Right? And so if we're here truly to serve them, then we actually have to have it regardless of what, if that's the end goal, right? And I do think once again, like I get why it happens. Solving the big question is there's so much packed into it and it's so hard that we just want to stick to something that's within the locus of our control, but we can't solve. Okay, here's something I've been doing for the last few years. I'm going to test it out and actually see if it resonates. And I don't mean for any of this to translate insensitively, but we're going to try it out, right? So let's say somebody
Mm-hmm.
has a sickness and they're just dealing with the symptoms and actually not dealing with the root cause, right? Let's say this person is losing weight, they have a receding hairline, they have a low white blood cell count, and so we're giving them hairline treatment. And we're giving them like better dietary issues, better dietary recommendations, etc. It's like dealing with the symptoms. But what if the root cause of what you're solving for is like that person has cancer?
Mm.
When you say cancer, it creates a space where a lot of people are like, wait a second, that's serious. Let's not talk about it unless it's really that because it's really big. He's like, yeah, it's really big. It's cancer. And I tell you what, if you just deal with the hairline situation, And if you just deal with the weight loss situation, and if you just deal with the white blood cell count, you're going to come up with different solutions, but it's never going to be the cancer solution. And that's the only way you're ever going to get better.
Wow.
From where I sit, the reality is a lot of what we're solving for in education, once again, we know this, a lot of us know this, like, well, we're solving for like, hundreds of years of racism. Duh. It's really hard to do. It's like, but operationally, what we start doing is like, let's deal with the hairline situation. Let's deal with the way things are get, but it's cancer. It's like, whoa, yeah, it's that big. We need an all hands on deck. It's like, but we can't control all those things. Like, that doesn't make it cancer any the less. It's cancer. And so we actually need an all hands on deck, and we need to treat it with that level of seriousness if we're going to solve. Like, it's the only way to do it.
Yeah.
And frankly, we might be freaked out every day that we do it because it's so big and it's cancer. It's like, we probably need to be, right? And there are a number of us that do this, right? There are a number of us that do feel this way. But I've found it largely in a systemic level, like, we do the hairline thing, we do the weight loss thing, and we do the white blood cell count. And I get why we do, but you're not going to solve cancer that way. And this is pervasively cancer on our society, on our community, in our communities, and with our kids. And unless we treat it that way, we're not going to get to the type of North Star that we talk about.
Amazing. Amazing. What qualifies someone, it seems like you have the qualifications that it takes, but what qualifies someone to be a leader in education, in your opinion? And it's a good follow-up with what we was just discussing, because it seems like there's a lot of leaders in education, but like you've already spoken about, it's really hard to get them to be like, this is the bullseye. So I'm just curious, what does that look like for you?
See, dude, last truth, this is going to be a broken record between us, man. I'll say something that depends on your definition of a leader.
I like the way you spun that back.
But like, like for me, once again, I just got really lucky being able to have a district CEO. She was an amazing leader, and Janice Jackson. Like her number 2, Latanya McDade, amazing. It had a series of like over 20 chiefs around it, all amazing. Everybody who directly reported to me, amazing people. Everybody who reported them, we were all leading in different capacities. And so from that space, we were all leading. We were all leaders, right? The districts that we got to work with, amazing school leaders who are actually working with and leading amazing teachers that we're doing groundbreaking, right? So great leaders at every aspect, right? I'd say like at a core, like it depends on where you're sitting and actually which strengths you're actually bringing to the table based off of where you are sitting, right? My job in, overall, like I think you have to believe in the potential for our community. Some people say it's like, well, it depends. I was like, no. Every community that has never been resourced, every black family, every brown family, every black kid, every brown kid is brilliant by design. And I tell you what, it's our job as a school system, as a leader in the school system, to actually make sure that they get what they need to actually grow into and continue to be who it is we know they are, and help them flesh out what that's going to look like for them. But believing that it's possible is actually a critical part of it, right? Being able to continuously call out like what the real issue is, and actually making sure that the solutions are actually mapping towards those solutions, critical part of it, right? Depending on where you're sitting, being able to really understand the instructional tools and techniques that are necessary to get kids to that portion are also relevant. If you're from a community aspect, being able to make sure that communities are effectively partnering with right? So it shifts depending. But one of the things that we also do know that is something that's increasingly being talked about is that people that actually have lived experiences that mirror those of the kids the youth that are actually being impacted is also very relevant, right? And so that's one of the reasons why I started this conversation framing it the way that I did, right? I am a black male, I am a Latino male. And the reality is when people look writ large in this country about, those that are most challenged in our K-12 education in the systems, they're looking at me, right? Frankly, I have actually had my types all throughout my K-12 education system, my K-12 education life growing up, because it wasn't built
Mm-hmm.
for me. But my parents like, oh, we taught you how to navigate this, and we're going to navigate it together. You are going to succeed. Ba boom, right? Every kid,
I like that.
every kid needs that same champion. Every kid
Yes,
needs the
indeed.
system to believe in them and will get them to where they need to go. And that's not the case all the time.
Yes,
We also
true.
need people that are in those decision making rooms that actually get the real challenges that are being faced by these communities. And that's not always the case, right? So we need them to be more diverse. We need them to have more females than they actually have, more black individuals, more Latinx individuals, so that the folks that more folks that have actually been through the challenging neighborhoods that some of these kids, so that every time the decisions are being made, they're actually being made with the right voice to shape the right experiences that are necessary. Heck, um, with my work in the district, a lot of the committees we put together to shift policy for the district, we had students in them. We had parents in them, we had principals in them, because like those voices are also necessary to say, like, here's what you're thinking about, but that was a few years ago. Here's what the experience is like now, and I'm being impacted by it. So it needs to be different, right? Um, so that's another aspect to it. So there's a whole series of things that like really depending on like where you're sitting, but people that like care, get it, smart, committed, will do things that really align to what the real issue is, and frankly, that actually have a lot of lived experience that will actually push that into the hard discussions and hard solutions that are necessary. Um, Once again, the stuff I'm talking about, like we're not talking about tweaking an educational system. We're talking about getting it to do what we say we want it to do, and that's a lot more than a tweak. It's
Mm,
possible, but the way that a lot of our systems operate, it's not likely we're going to get there.
wow. I know that you implement strategies, right? And one strategy that stood out to me that I would like to hear you, the experience implementing. How was it? What is a cross departmental? I hope I'm saying that word correct. Strategy, and how did you use this to combat the district's most impending challenge at the time, which was declining enrollment?
Frankly, so I want to be transparent with the enrollment challenge that's referred to in there. So that enrollment challenge, like that's not a Chicago thing, that's a US thing, right?
Mm,
So if you go, so I've seen a lot. So what, we're in September right now. If you go back the past like 8 months and you actually read articles on the 74, like there are articles all across the country that are talking about, see the superintendent for Los Angeles, LAUSD, really highlighting that there's an Armageddon because enrollment has actually decreased so much, right? Um, New Orleans, Minneapolis, school districts across the country are saying like we actually have less students than we ever had before, and a number of these cities it's been happening for a while, and there's a bigger why behind a lot of this, right? Like in
mm,
mass, birth rates in this country have actually gone down. So if you're birthing less kids, then there are going to be less kids to go into the school system. Period. That's it, right?
wow,
Immigration's gone down, right? And so historically in
interesting.
the United States, like families that come in through immigration, like have larger family sizes.
Hmm.
They're having more kids, and the reality is like when you have immigration decreasing, like over the past decade, immigration in Chicago, it's halved, right? So you fundamentally have less students going into the system, so it's going to be less. Period. That's it, right? But
Wow.
one of the things, and once again, this is not a Chicago thing. I'll say I've done this type of work, Camden, New Jersey, Memphis, Nashville, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, across Washington, and actually, like universally, I'll say one of the things that I actually see always like I always approach all this work through a historic lens. And so I'm the new guy to a city. Let me figure out whether schools were always like this, what got us to that point, what's happened since then. And across the board, um, there's a high correlation between areas that were redlined once upon a time
Hmm. I
in the
know of
50s and
redlining.
60s, i.e., it, like these places, didn't receive investment in any way, shape, or form. A lot of them continue not to receive investment, and actually, these are the places where people are leaving at higher rates. Okay. Right, so they've never received an investment, and now they don't have investment, and so like now people aren't population is also going down. What do you think is going to happen, right? When you don't
Wow.
you get what you invest in, and when you're not investing that, right? And so this isn't, once again, this is not a Chicago. This is something happening all across the country. COVID actually put it on fast forward, right? So in the COVID situation, it created a space where places that were seeing declining enrollment, you had a lot of districts saying, like, well, we want to keep our students at home. Sorry, not we want to. We actually need to keep our students at home for a variety of reasons. Totally different conversation.
Mm.
But we actually saw a lot of families drop off, right? A lot of families lost in the system, picking different public school options, picking options outside of the system. But overall, across the board, nationally, we actually saw a huge dip in students attending public schools, right? So my push for like anybody actually listening is like, take a look at the articles. It's New York, Los Angeles, all across the board it's happening, right? Certain places it's been happening over decades. And
Wow.
that's even more compounded, right? And so for the places that have been doing it, it's been happening for a while, and now they're actually facing even more of an SOS because of COVID. It just makes a challenging situation even more challenging, right? And so me being able to work across, when I was at Chicago Public Schools, being able to work across 5 departments, and being able to say, like, well, what are the levers that we have in the Office of Access and Enrollment to actually combat some of this larger challenge? What are the options, like, innovation incubation, like, what can we do across the charter sector? What can we do across, a funding stream that we provide to actually create new school models where they're necessary? Like, how can we make investments in areas that will increase the likelihood of families having the types of schools they want in the neighborhood so they'll stay there instead of going to a different part of town or actually leaving town, right? What is it that we can do to keep families more satisfied, i.e. getting them into the schools that they would most want to get into? And some of this is tripping back into the earlier part of our small successes conversation, right? Well, we just worked across, like, so what are all the levers we have, and how can we start knocking them down one by one? And that's a lot of the work that we codified and we started putting into place. But frankly, wise truth, full transparency, solving any of the challenges that I'm highlighting, it's a very like, these are long-term initiatives, right? They don't get solved in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And frankly, the places that historically have been impacted most by these, when I say like places that actually haven't been talking about these conversations for a while, if ever, are also the ones that actually need to have them the most before they could do this work, which just makes solving the challenges that much longer, right? And so, with the solid team that we had over there, we were able to create a meaningful starting point. And frankly, right now, the baton is on the current administration to be able to continue that work. And I have, few doubts that they'll continue to do what they need to do to make sure that the end goal for anybody who works at Chicago Public Schools is met. Great school for every kid. Great school for every kid in their neighborhood.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing answer. In your opinion, now this is going to be good. This leads back to what we were talking about with small successes. In your opinion, what is the solution for providing underserved communities with the educational tools to make sure that children are receiving the proper education in these communities?
So it's that question is packed with a lot, and so the answer would be packed with a lot. So I'm going to try to demystify and actually make it as simple as possible, even though it's not a simple question, it's not a simple answer, right? There's a big caveat, right?
No problem.
But I'll say, like, in general, if you actually have students that actually have the most academic needs, in general, you want to make sure they have. So if you have students, for example, that are years behind in reading, you would probably want to make sure that they have access to the teachers that are best at growing students in front of them, right?
Right.
right? And so we want students that have the most need to have access to the educators that are best situated to actually provide them with that support. But in order to like recruit and even retain those educators, first of all, they need to be in the system. So you need to solve for that. But you need to have a high quality leader if you're going to get there and stay there. Like that's the only thing that keeps you, right? And so, what is it going to take to have a high quality leader that's going to get and actually stay with their school, their students, their communities throughout that window? That's another aspect of what you need to have. But once again, even if you just solve the school stuff, this is also like a community writ large challenge, right? And so unless you're in the situation where you're also saying, we are going to provide the types of resources that have actually been kept away from these communities over past decades, not just for schools, but for solving all the challenges that actually make a community whole, then we're not going to get there, right? So this is a this is a resources question. This is and this is a question about high quality educators that are actually matched with the students that have the most need. And in the space in which we're able to do both of those at the same time, I think we'd have a fighting chance. But I see it more as the exception versus the rule. That's how this challenge is approached at large.
Wow. It's no easy answer, man, to solve this education problem. Is what I'm starting to notice here. I'm really happy I interviewed you about this.
I just gave you an easy answer. That's actually an easy answer. Whether it's done or not is actually more complicated. And the things that keep us from doing that, like things can be complicated but not complex. Maurice Sweeney. That's a call out. You say that all the time. But like what I just gave you said, like if we actually have educators that are most qualified at actually like growing and supporting students with the students that need it most, and we actually have the best school leaders actually growing and supporting them, and we actually have all the resources that are necessary to like not just deal with the school but the personal aspects of like the students in their communities. Pretty solid pathway. Another analogy that I like giving is I like saying like, and we know how to do this. We do it all the time, right? When we say like, hey, we're going to build a brand new suburb, what do? Do we just build houses and leave it there?
No, of course not. You put a system, you put people in place to make that system work.
Yep. We say it's like, well, if we're going to build houses over here, we need a nearby school because otherwise families aren't going to move over here. And I mean, suburbs, families, right? And we say, yeah, but they're not just going to go to school and come home. Like, so what other things do they need? Like, let's give them things they need. And you put those in shopping malls and stores, and we put all that stuff there when we're developing a new community. We do that. But when we say, like, hey, there are these communities that have actually never been invested in, so like they're actually starting less resources because we never put them there. Let's just solve the school thing. Let's give them a few additional $100 over here to solve that school thing. What's the difference in how we're thinking about these? And why? So we know how to do it, we just don't do it. Now, that's not to say that it's easy, right? What I'm highlighting is like, we know how to resource communities when we want to build a new community and give them everything they need. But we don't do it, right? Because you wouldn't actually build suburbs and like give some of these resources and actually not talk with the people and say like, what else do you need? Is this working? Like what is like, no. Feedback loops. You talk with them, you make sure it's working, you invest accordingly. It's like, but we do that less in this situation. Why? What's the difference? Right? Wow. So it's challenging to get to the answer. But we know the types of things we need to do to get there. We just don't do them. Some of it's because
there's no implementation.
But we know how to approach these types of challenges and opportunities. And frankly, we know that you need to invest. You need to invest comprehensively to actually have communities that are thriving. Now, I'd also say if you take communities that actually always had things taken away and actually hardly ever invested in, then you have a lot more to clean up. You have a lot more to like back pay and invest. Yeah.
Wow.
But we don't have a tendency of doing those things or having those conversations when we're talking about these types of solutions.
Mm.
Complicated, but not complex.
Right, I get exactly what you're saying because she was like, I gave you the simple answer, but what I'm also discovering is, I guess the hard part is the implementation of such, and it's not hard. It's just finding the people that would like to implement it and get it done. You know, because I like the analogy that you drew with the apartments and the living spaces and how those are developed, comparing that to the education system. What is your opinion? Excuse me, on homeschooling?
Homeschooling?
Yeah. What is your opinion on that? Especially if somebody who works in the education system. I know that homeschooling became popular, especially during the pandemic. So, what is your opinion on that?
I think it depends. I think it depends. Like, frankly, I went through homeschooling myself.
Hmm.
When we were in Mexico, so we were in Mexico for a few years, the six of us, and all Spanish speaking school.
Sorry,
No, it's
excuse
all good.
me.
It's all
It's
good.
on my end. It's a van. It's pulling out. But
Um,
continue. I'm listening to you.
but we went to school during the daytime, and because my parents didn't want us to fall behind in English, when we got home, we would actually go through homeschooling, right? So all six of us like had like double time in school, and frankly, we didn't fall behind in English. When we got back to the United States after years abroad in Mexico, we were on grade level because we were going to school and learning English at home. And we were actually all ahead in math because Guadalajara, Jalisco, like the school we went to, was ahead in math, right? And so homeschooling works for us. It doesn't work for every individual in every environment, right? Like for
Hmm.
homeschooling to work, you need to like understand the needs of each kid. You need to make sure that you can provide the resources they need, whether it's technology, whether it's time, whether it's like somebody on hand who can actually provide the right type of instruction. And not everybody has that. Not everybody needs it at the same level, right? And so
Absolutely correct.
that's what a universal school like that's one of the reasons why we have districts, right? We have districts saying like, hey, in general we know that there's supposed to be a minimum bar that we're getting all of our kids to, and here's what that minimum bar is, and we're going to make sure that everybody gets an education at that level. Like that's the aspiration for what it's supposed to be. Now overall, like, doesn't really meet that bar in a number of places, right? Which goes into the prior conversations we were having across the board, right? And
Hmm.
so I do think there is a space, a meaningful space for students who have certain home realities, students that have certain educational needs where homeschooling fits. Um, I would be remiss to also say that districts that are able to provide writ large quality education for everyone who doesn't fit the mold of either of those is also going to be necessary, right? So they
Mm.
can both coexist. They can both be true at the same time, but how to create a space where they're able to work together, where there's a higher level of confidence that's we're actually molding well-rounded students. Like every student in Chicago is well-rounded, whether you go to homeschool or a district school or a non-public school or charter. Like that's the goal. As systems, we don't know how. I don't think we know how to get there yet.
Mm.
But I do
Interesting.
think there is a role for it. I do think there is a role for it to be played. And you're right. The COVID experience did elevate that interest.
Yeah, definitely did. I know a couple of people that was drifted closer towards homeschooling than sticking with the traditional school system. I wanted to bring up your time on TEDx. I think that this is very interesting. I like the video title actually, and I wanted to highlight that. So there's a video titled on YouTube called "Lessons Left Out," featuring Bing Howell on TEDx in 2019. Can you please explain the meaning behind the title and give us insights? What lessons do you think of the education?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, a lot of it is the embodiment of a lot of the conversation we've had so far. Like lessons
Mm-hmm.
left out, like it's titled that way largely because it sounds educational, and it's about education. But one of the lessons left out is, you know, you have to, like, from a school system level, like, really engaging communities in transformative solutions is part of the secret sauce to making transformation happen that we kind of know for all the reasons we were talking about, but it is very rarely at the core of actually how plans and strategies are actually built, right? And so how like in that TED talk, like in that TEDx talk, you know, I
Hmm.
sort of sort of talk to some of the experiences we had in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where frankly, like every school, I haven't checked for the most recent school year actually, but every school that we had actually like opened while there is actually one of the fastest improving schools in the state in regards to like academic growth, right? And part of the model that we were sort of building as we were sort of scaling different choices is we were making sure that community members were able to sort of shape like, okay, this is an organization, an individual that did this work, you know, in New Orleans, but they never did it in Baton Rouge. Let's ask some questions. Like they did this in Texas, but they never did it over. It's like, is there actually a match or not? And actually use a process of community members actually shaping who was going to like come and actually be a part of our Baton Rouge community. And actually from there, actually help shape what that growing picture would actually look like. That was a huge
Hmm.
part of what makes the place successful, right? So like that's kind of like the lesson left out is well, if we know community members are like the secret sauce, like let's sort of keep it there, but we leave that stuff out. Bless you,
Thank you. I
right?
appreciate.
Um, but like it actually starts off with more of a personal experience that actually ties also into something that I didn't share was actually my personal experience. But when I actually first moved to Mexico,
Hmm.
like that receding hairline, low white blood cell count, losing weight situation, that was me.
Oh
Um,
wow.
and they actually the doctors did get to the morning. It's like, we think he has cancer. We actually just don't know what kind it is. We've never seen anything like this. But when they called it cancer, people were paying attention in a different kind of way. They started shipping my blood to the United States, across Mexico and Cuba, because like this is serious. We've never seen anything like this. But you don't get that level of attention on things unless you call out what it is, right?
Mm.
Once again, if you were just working on my receding hairline, give him some of whatever that gross stuff is, right? If it's just an eating
Right.
thing, it's like, well, give him more food. Give him stuff that he likes. Is like, but none of that would have solved what my issue was. But my issue was something like deeper, and it was inside, right? And so
Mm.
my personal story was like largely about the answers are inside of me. The answers for communities are actually in the communities if and when we value them, and we put that at the center of the transformation we're trying to build. There's no way that me as an outsider is going to go to Baton Rouge, Louisiana and say, like, hey, I have more aspirations than you have for your kids. That's arrogant. That's folly, right? You're your kids. You want them to transform your city. You want them to transform the world. Like, what are we doing together? What do you want this to look like? And how do we tie in my knowledge of like what's possible elsewhere with what you want for your kids? And that symbiosis gets us to what we're talking about. Once
Mm.
again, I think like the work that we did over there, like we have a really strong proof point for what's possible. We didn't solve everything, really like a lot of really solid wins, but a
Wow.
lot of what was at the core of those wins was the lesson left out around, yo, you know, families and communities matter. How do we put them at the core of like shaping all this stuff? Great.
You know, I wanted to sit here and let you know something, man, while I'm interviewing you, and something telling me to tell you this. That title is very strong. Um, and I think that it would be in your best interest to consider writing a book. I think that would be cool, man. Consider writing a book called Lessons Left Out about your personal experience in the education system. I think a lot of people can gather insight from that, and I can really see that being a very good seller, especially with the way you explain certain things and your personality. It's cool, man. I would like you to really consider that. Lessons Left Out. Really good ring to
When it comes when that comes from a person named Wise Truth, you kind of have to think about it in a different way.
it. Thank you. I appreciate that. I
Thank you.
appreciate that. You're very welcome. I thought about it for a while. Even when I first saw the title, I was like, this is strong. I can see this as a book. Like, wow, dude, that'll be amazing. Um, One thing you did talk about in while you was on TED that stood out to me was high quality education and you being able to go through life receiving a high quality education. But I felt maybe I mistook it, but I felt like there was something still missing. Yes, there was. You said there was something still missing in the beginning of your TED talk. I remember that. In your opinion, what defines a high quality education?
Frankly, so I'm not a parent and I don't have my own kids. Actually, sorry, I take it back. I do have one kid and it's a dog, right? So I don't have my own human children, right? And so, like, I think a quality education is actually best defined by families being able to say, here's what we want for our kids, right?
Right.
Like, and my kids actually being able to meet that. And once again, I don't think that that's mutually exclusive from what a system would want, right? In general, the reality is like, we have a system. We need to make sure that a system is actually helping us understand, like, are kids learning or not? Are they growing academically or not? But I think we both also agree that, like, that's only part of being a successful individual, right?
Right.
Like, especially right now with COVID, it's like, yeah, but what about the mental well-being, right? Like how mentally, like, strong are our kids? How are they able to persuade, motivate, assist, and inspire each other? How are they able to make it through trying situations, right? How are they able to continue to grow? Like, all of those things that actually fit in the whole bucket of 21st century, all of those are really relevant too. And frankly, writ large, we don't have a way of measuring any of that stuff, right? Like, if, like, I'd be curious as to, like, you know, your experience when you were growing up in New York, like how you picked the high school that you wanted to go to. Did you go to the high school that was right around the corner? Or was there, like, one that you really wanted to get into? It's like, well, how did you define whether that, like, what about that drew you, right? Because sometimes.
I never been to high school, but continue.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay.
No, it's no problem. I graduated college. Continue.
but sometimes it's like, you know, sometimes safety is actually more important than any of those things, right?
Right.
Sometimes proximity to home is actually more important than any of those things, right? Right. And so, like, when we talk about quality education, like, once again, the places that have been that were historically redlined across this country are also the places that actually have some of the highest levels of crime in this country, right? Also, some of the places that actually have been underinvested in the least. Also, the places that actually have food deserts. So, like, this is the story of our country and actually how and where it's been and actually where it is right now. But when we're saying, like, quality, like, some people do not have the luxury of quality because they just want their kids to go to a safe school, and the school that's right around the corner, like, isn't safe because it also hasn't been invested in. And because people are leaving, so they don't have all the resources they need. So it's all like it all spirals, right? And so at the core, I do think so. I believe in, like, some folks think, like, accountability is a word that should be thrown out. I actually think accountability is a word that we really need. I think a lot of people forget what accountability, what things were like when we didn't have more general levels of academic accountability, right? When you couldn't say whether a school was performing well or not. Well, what happened is, like, well, we really didn't have a way to say that, like, this school that actually has a lot of, like, black and brown students really doing well, to be able to diagnose that we might need to do something different. There was no way to show that. And so we do need a way to say that is or isn't happening. Now, what we do with that information is a very different question, right? So there's a whole series, like, schools are designed to help kids learn and grow academically. So accountability, like, so quality school needs to have that as one aspect. My vote would be academic growth being a huge part of it, right? But whether a school is able to develop all these other social emotional needs, problem solving and decision making, etc., that's also very relevant. We have less research that highlights how to do that effectively. But doing all of that without the backdrop of really understanding the communities that actually need it most, actually have other barriers that are in place that are actually more systemic and have existed over time, is also leaving out critical plot points. And we can't do that. But frankly, I think, like, we rewind and say, like, but if we had conversations with these families and said, like, hey, what does a quality school mean to you? They would say, yeah, we want safe schools, right? Right? It's like, cool. we want schools where our kids are being prepared not just to like do well in school, but
Exercise.
like afterwards and like compete in this 21st century world. Like, yeah, they want that too. Cool, help us understand, right? And so we have a tendency. It's like I've seen a tendency to like treat it like like families want something very different than what the systems provide, and I've actually more seen like we don't really have the conversations to calibrate. We said like we're in charge, and so here's what we want, and well, you all should just like make decisions according to like what we've come up with. And that was actually one of the bigger blessings of some of the work that I was able to do with an amazing team led by Jeff Broom at Chicago Public Schools. We were really shifting toward that lens. Yes, there's certain things that really matter to the district overall, but let's actually hear from educators. Let's hear from parents. Let's hear from students. What does this really need to look like? And the district is doing a lot of work to evolve what that conversation is looking like. And I very much look forward to nationally how folks are going to sort of look to that as a new benchmark for what quality education looks like.
Mm. Mm. What does the future of education look like for you? Well, in your opinion, excuse me, what does the future of education look like? Because I wanted to bring this up, and I want to start off by kicking off a conversation I had with somebody else about the future of education. And in terms of learning styles, I feel like in the future they will start to fine-tune or try to fine-tune the curriculum or fine-tune the way they go about teaching to the students' learning style. So some students are hands-on, some students learn through reading better. And that's one of the aspects that I see in the future of or becoming something in the future of education, is starting to understand how to better fit that student's needs by understanding what their learning style is, and then develop a teaching style surrounded around that, especially with the technological age of doing a lot of one-on-one through computers. You know what I'm saying? I can see that becoming a thing. So, well, I want to hear your opinion in yourself.
I'm going to answer the question a different way.
Yeah, no problem.
The way I'm going to answer is I'm more going to answer what I think the future needs to look like if it's to be responsive to the system and the students that are going into it, right? So what's happening in public education as the demographics of our country are shifting is, we're having the population of Latinx students in the system the public education system is larger than it's ever been, and that's going to continue to grow, right? And, within the next decade, we're going to have, for the first time, more students that are not white in the public education system than there are students that are white, right? And what that also means is, okay, when the public education system in this country was built, it wasn't built with, for example, the need to support Latinx students. Mm-hmm. Now, they're a growing critical part of the system. Well, how does it need to shift to be responsive to the fact that, a number of the families come in speaking Spanish? Never really thought about it, that scope or scale. Well, you kind of need to. That's where the families are coming in. If you're going to be responsive to the family and the students, then you can't, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's but that's not how we were. It's well, then you have to figure it out, right? And so the shifting demographics create a space where we actually need to make sure that the needs of all the students in the system are actually mirrored in how the system is designed and how the system is operated, right? That goes to some of what I was highlighting earlier about representation and actually needing voices of people who have experienced some of the challenges, being able to say, actually, my family member, my mom didn't speak English, and she had to come to these school conferences and I had to translate. And so you all have to take that into account, because once upon a time I was the only kid in the school, but now there are 15, 20% of the school has that type of reality. How do you deal with that? It's well, if it's now a critical part of your system, you need to be responsive to that, even though you never were in the past, right? Now, if you extrapolate that example and say, okay, well, what does that mean school leaders need to look like and educators need to look like? Well, in general, they actually need to mirror the demographics and experiences of the kids in order to be empathetic, in order to provide access for these kids, in order to be able to see them for the true geniuses that they are, in order for the school environments to be as diverse and rich as they actually need to be for those students to get what they need for the 21st century. All of those things need to be true, right? And that's the foundation of actually what needs to be different. I'd also say, like, on top of that, you're totally right. You know, each kid learns in their own ways, has their own preferences, and frankly, one of the big blessings of technology, if we do it right, former technologist myself, but if we do it right, it creates a space in which, yeah, we actually have the tools to be able to say, like, Charlie learns in a certain way, Juan learns in a certain way. How can we actually use what we know about him plus technology to get him what he needs? Because frankly, having a really diverse school and students that are at different learning levels and even language levels sometimes is really challenging for one educator to manage across an entire class. Like, what can be helpful is like technology you've done, right? So how do we do that? It's like, well, we do have examples of how it's been done in micro examples, but we don't have examples how it's been done at scale, right? And so really being able to leverage what we do know about technology to like scale up learning the way that it needs to is a part of it. Pulling in families as a part of the solution for all the reasons why you highlighted and why I highlighted is also a part of it, right? And then consistently, we have a tendency not to address this. But if we continue just to focus on school and actually not the realities surrounding the communities that actually have needed and continue to need all the resource and investment, then we're not going to get the types of realities we're talking about. So that type of investment that's, you know, well, let's just give a few, you know, tens, hundreds of additional dollars to like improve like this one school program that will like impact this entire community. Like, that's not it. That's a part of it. But if you don't do all the other stuff, it's not really going to work, right? So the comprehensive investment is going to make sure that the world that's surrounding the school and that students' reality is what it needs to be. That's also a part of it. So we got our work cut out for us.
Wow. Sounds like a lot of work. It's not impossible. It can't get done, but a lot of work. Moving forward, we're down to a couple last questions here. What advice can you give someone looking to work in the education system?
Well, I mean, frankly, it's, I'd say, like, you know, one of the things that I also value about being in education, in the public education space, is everybody has a real perspective because lots of us have engaged in some way, shape, or form, right? Not just like whether you're a teacher or a principal or not, but like if you've been through a public school, and many of us have, we have a take based off of our own personal experience, right? So we all know a student, an uncle, an aunt who's like, first, like, if it's something you're curious about, like, go in and experience some of it, right? Right? Like, there's a way to, like, you know, visit a school. There's a way to volunteer at a school. Frankly, work through the system, right? It's like, be a substitute, right? Like, figure out what it really is as you're understanding that this is actually what you want to do. So you actually have a real understanding of what you're really trying to solve for, what you're really going to be doing, aside from just hopping into it, right? I'd also say, like, very similar to my own experience, like, I was never a teacher, right? And there's a huge value across the board for, like, people who have lived experience as educators all throughout. But the issues that we've been talking about, Wise Truth, aren't just school issues. They're community issues too, man. They're systemic issues too, right? And so the reality is we need a lot of committed, really smart people that are going to put their nose to the action to get this work done, because that's what our communities need and that's what our communities deserve, right? And so I'd also say, like, regardless of like where you're sitting, if like this is the type of work that you're curious about and you don't necessarily know how to get there, once again, going to a school, volunteering, like, all those are pathways, but also taking a look at like different programs to actually develop the different skill sets. Like the Broad Foundation, they're based out of Yale right now. I did it when they were based out of California. They're fundamental in really being able to help me develop my ability to be a systems leader. And, you know, between the exposure they provided, between the network of alumni and like peers across different states to just deepen how I thought about it, like, it put me in a place where like my mind just did this. And frankly, those peers continue to do that to my mind, right?
Mm.
And so really being able to talk with and engage with folks that are actually in the space. But I do want to like anchor this in like a broader shout out. Um, this is an all hands on deck type of challenge. And once again, it's not just schools. It's if you work in if you work in a city, if you work in a state, if you work in a bank, if you work in architecture, right? Like really being able to like focus on like amazing country with a lot of resources, a lot of things we're not doing right. But
Right.
if we build a foundation in our youth, we can get ourselves closer to being who we profess that we want to be, right? So how do we align ourselves on that end goal? Like that's critical. And so you can actually be an education advocate and actually not be in the K-12 education space. We'll take it.
Mm.
But educate yourself on what the issues are and actually how, like, what it really takes to support the community that actually really need it. And if they tell you, then listen to it. I do not know more than what you
Wow.
want for your kid, right? Arrogant. But the bigger part of my shout out is actually is like if you have lived experience that actually mirrors the experience of the kids that are in the community that actually need it most, like we need you. We need you.
Mm.
Frankly, like there are not many Latino folks that are actually in leadership across the country in this space. We need more of it.
Mm.
Lots of people don't know how to access it because, like, well, for a number of reasons, a whole nother conversation in itself. But if you can't see it, then it's hard to be it, et cetera, et cetera. Um, that's exactly why we need y'all in the game. Same thing for African Americans. We have significantly more African American leaders than there are like Latinx leaders. We don't have enough. And that's leading systems, that's leading classrooms, that's leading schools. We need it all across the
Mm.
board. And then if you're tangential in anything that's touching schools, because everything is touching schools and kids in some way, shape, or form in the city, we need your minds focused on this issue. How do we build our pipeline of kids to be the best and brightest and like what they were put here to be?
Wow. Amazing, man. No, that was great. That was great. You need somebody that's really headstrong and their heart is in it, to be honest with you. I have one last question for you. One last
Ooh,
one.
yay.
So we end the interview the same way every time. So I want to ask you, what does being human mean to you?
Um, so I'll hark back to another Carla Picardism. Um, I think a lot of us have a tendency of like evaluating who we are with what we do, and that's human
Mm.
doing, and it's not human being. Um,
Mm.
let's see, over this past weekend, sometimes like even if you know something, sometimes hearing it a certain way and at the right time is like, it just resonates in a whole different kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
So for this question, like over the weekend, I was watching this video where this gentleman was talking about he wasn't devaluing the past or the future. He's like, they're not real. Like your past is a memory, the future is a projection, but the only time that's really there is actually right now. Like that's really it, right? And
Mm.
actually being able to make the most of that opportunity, that time, and today, like that's what human being is. Really being able to acknowledge that today is what we have. Tomorrow is not promised, and yesterday is a memory. But right now, we can actually make an impact in the world by whoever it is we touch, whoever it is we see, just by being our full and wholesome selves and bringing ourselves to each opportunity as such. That's what, for me, being a human being is about at its best. And frankly, I do think that if you focus today on being that person, then tomorrow is a heck of a lot better, not just for you, but for everybody as you touch. And that ripple effect is actually what gets us closer to the type of world we talk about being in.
Mm. Thank you. It was great interviewing you, Ming. I really did enjoy this interview. Amazing interview. I hope that people have found a great information within it and a reality that is faced in the education system. I hope that this also answers a lot of questions for people who are wondering about why the education system is the way it is, and some of the concerns that people do also oftentimes voice to me about the education system is the stagnation that they see that it goes through from time to time that they experience. Is there any closing remarks that you would like to say to the audience? And also, please enlighten them as to where you can be found on social media if you would like. But yes, the floor is now yours.
Wise Truth, I just want to thank you for like this is the time to have this conversation. Frankly, I am used to doing interviews and actually doing a lot of talk about the work that I do. I'm actually not as used to actually talking about myself in the full context. So thank you for just probing for
Yeah, no
like
problem.
who I am and like why I do that. Like it's just really thoughtful and really really intentional. So I tip my hat.
Thank you. I
Um,
appreciate it.
Um, in general, I'd say let's see, social media, Twitter or LinkedIn at Bing Howell, BingHowell is the Twitter handle, and LinkedIn it's well, I mean there aren't a lot of Bing
Howells.
Howells actually on there, so that kind of solves itself. Um, but Troy,
Continue.
Wise Truth, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And please consider writing the book, Lessons Left Out. I really, really, really want you to consider that. It's just something that continues to resonate within my spirit, to continue to remind you of that. I am going to name this interview that also. So that because that was it's just such a strong name. I can see that amongst many great books. I can see you. Yeah, I can see a future with that book. But let me let you go. Everybody, you do. He's also found on Instagram, if you're searching for him on Instagram, as Neos underscore red pill. This interview will be posted on Instagram 24 hours from the time it was filmed. Everybody, have a great day, and I look forward to speaking with you later. And remember that we are all human, all right? Have a good one, Bing. It was great speaking with you, and let's connect soon.
Thank you,
Peace.
sir.
Yes, sir.